I'm going to compare two moments in Egypt's constitutional history. The first moment is 60 years ago, the first transitional period between 1952 and 1954, when we can argue that the first Egyptian republic was born. And then the second transitional moment is from February 11th of last year until God knows when. We're still going through it as we speak. And the hope, of course, is that the current transitional process we're going through would end with a new constitution that can take Egypt into a solid democracy that somehow completes the revolution that has started and is yet to be completed. The two periods, again, can be compared in the sense that between 52 to 54, in July, specifically 1952, the Egyptian military staged a coup d'etat that toppled the monarchy eventually, and then it took it 2 years to slowly take the country into the military regime that has been ruling it for the last 60 years. The year and a half that have passed so far since the January 25th revolution is the beginning of a second transitional period that we are hoping would finally bring an end to this military regime that has lasted again for over 60 years. My interest above all is in the role of lawyers and slogans such as the rule of law in both periods. Okay, you don't have the slides. The first, for those of you who do have the page with you, the first caricature you have is before what's called the March 1954 crisis. It's the cover of a magazine, Rosa Yusuf, and it shows the Egyptian constitution, the expected constitution, being taken by the hand by Colonel Nasser and Colonel Naguib, the two main figureheads of the military coup at the time, and in sort of a parade that looks like sort of a wedding march. And then behind them, quite a stout guy, is Abdelaziz Senhouri, who is sort of Egypt's foremost jurist, and he's sort of playing with a musical instrument that is celebrating the parade. The expectation at that time was that within 2 weeks the Egyptian constitution that was being drafted then in 1954 would be adopted, and the country would move into a democratic regime and so on. What happened in reality was that a week after that, what is known as the March 1954 crisis emerged, or took place. One of the highlights of it was that Senhouri, who was basically the legal advisor to the military free officers who were ruling the country at the time, at the height of the crisis, a mob of demonstrators attacked the court where Senhouri worked, and then eventually attacked him. He was sent off to hospital. The next day, from his hospital bed, he formally accused Nasser of staging the attack on him. Accused him to a public prosecutor, and then Senhouri was denied leaving the country for 10 years, was stripped of his political and civic rights, and so on. This story typically is used today to show that Senhouri was a figure of democracy who stood for the rule of law against Nasser and the military who were trying to drag the country into undemocratic constitutional measures, and that in return he was beaten up. And in that sense he is the first hero of the rule of law in Egypt at the time of revolution, sort of a legal elite who actually stood for it at a critical moment. Now in reality, for 2 years before Senhouri was beaten up, he had actually extended a great deal of support to most of the measures that were adopted by the free officers, the band of army personnel who staged the coup. And these started from barely a week after the military coup happened. The king abdicated, we had a crown prince, the crown prince was an infant, The constitution required a regency council to swear an oath of allegiance before they take on power, before parliament. Parliament had been dissolved. The military officers did not want parliament to return back. And Sanhouri had the Conseil d'Etat, or the State Council, our administrative court, which he was the head of at the time, issue a fatwa, or a legal opinion, stating that actually the Regency Council can swear before the cabinet and not before parliament, and therefore stopping parliament from convening, barely a week after the military coup. And then he spent the 2 years after that allowing for laws that are called Qanin Azl Siyasi, or purging laws, which are intended to purge the political scene of the political elite that existed before the military coup. And then laws that created exceptional courts to try many of these figures. So the court of revolution, the court of the people, the court of treason, Mahkamat al-Ghadr, and so on. And then other laws that were intended to shield any of the measures taken by the military at that time from review by the courts. In that sense, Sanhouri, who is regarded today as a man who was beaten up as a judge defending the rule of law and so on, because of what happened in '54, had actually spent the 2 years before that effectively helping the military curtail everything that we associate with the rule of law today. Now, why go back and remember Sanhouri? Egypt, as you might know, has been going for the last year and a half through one legal hiccup after the next. Once again, we have a small band of legal elites who are helping, once again, the military, which is once again openly ruling the country. Of course, what we've had over the last 60 years, or certainly since 1956, when Colonel Nasser took off his military suit and put on a civilian suit and never put on a military suit again, is essentially a military regime that has had a continuous civilian facade. So the military theoretically returned back its barracks. We theoretically had elections and so on, but the security heart of the regime remained. After February 11th, the military suddenly has become again ruling in your face, not behind the convenient curtain of the trappings of civilian rule or democratic rule. And in handling that situation, it has resorted once again to a number of legal elites, judges. Actually, one particular judge who is also belonging to the same court that Sanhouri once headed, the administrative court. And in one hiccup after the other, we have gone from March, not last year, but the year before, through a referendum on amending the constitution, in which 6 articles were presented to Egyptian voters. There was an overwhelming majority in support of the amendment, although most jurists had said that the referendum was a constitutional farce, because if we actually had a revolution, then how could the constitution of the ancient regime continue with us and be subject to a referendum? This was then followed by the army, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, the SCAF, adding basically over 50 articles to the 6 articles that we were asked to vote on, slapping them together and then issuing a constitutional declaration, which was very strange, since we had already been at the ballot boxes barely a week before, and we could have been asked to vote on the entire package and not just 6 articles. And then the situation kept on getting more and more farcical constitutionally, leading basically up to elections of the president yesterday. As some of you again may know, we went to vote for Egypt's new president yesterday in the first runoffs. it is a weird situation. It's almost the constitutional equivalent of an arranged marriage, where we are dealing with presidents or candidates who are running for the position of president, which has yet no job description. And we as voters are asked to actually vote for a president who has yet no job description, because as of far, we do not have a constitution. So it's basically just, we vote for him and then we wait and see what powers we have, and we see whether the marriage works or not. Lawyers, to a large extent, are responsible for the series of, not just lawyers, but particular members of the legal elite who are once again helping the army after 60 years, are quite responsible for this farcical situation that we see ourselves in today. And what is worse, and I'll try to wrap up here, is that suddenly the term rule of law has become a counter-revolutionary force discursively. Mubarak and his gang, for example, are being tried before ordinary courts. The reactivation of the courts that Sanhouri Nasser allowed between 1952 and 54, the exceptional courts of the revolution, or the courts of treason, or the courts of the people, which are all exceptional courts that are intended to achieve revolutionary justice without observing particular rules on evidentiary barriers to conviction, for example. There has been, since the revolution in the last one, January 25th, started an opposition to trying any of the Mubarak regime figures before any exceptional courts. And the claim has constantly been rule of law, rule of law, rule of law. We have already experienced these exceptional courts before, 60 years ago. We know what they did to our political scene, and we do not want to repeat the same mistakes again. So the end result is Mubarak and 6 of the principal coterie of people, of key figures of the regime, are basically accused of 3 crimes. Mubarak in particular, and his 2 sons. They're accused of owning 2 villas in Sharm el-Sheikh that were given in return of assisting a businessman in shady dealings, and then accused of selling gas to Israel for less than market price, and accused of inciting violence against the protesters. And it's incredibly likely that, first of all, the 3 crimes just are, they sound ridiculous. 30 years of corruption and political oppression do not amount to these 3 crimes, simply. And then it is also incredibly likely that Mubarak will get off at least on 2 of these 3 crimes. So on the inciting violence and on the sale of gas to Israel below market price. So that in the end, if there will be a decision, it is most likely to be on the 2 villas in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is again, quite ridiculous. So, no, you can't try Mubarak before ordinary courts. No, we cannot reactivate exceptional courts. No, we cannot use the law of purging to remove key figures of the NDP, the National Democratic Party, which ruled Egypt until the revolution. All of these are exceptional measures, and the opposition, again, is through the vocabulary of the rule of law. The rule of law does not allow this. We are a revolution that is invested in the rule of law. The end result, effectively, is that now one of the main figures of this old regime is running for president, Ahmed Shafi, from yesterday. At the same time, you have over 12,000 civilians who have been referred to military courts and have received decisions or judgments ranging up to 5 years in prison, and these military courts, the trials can last for like 3 minutes, potentially in the kitchen of a barracks. It's not it lacks any form of due process whatsoever. Something needs to change. We'll see how it will go. There is a need to avoid that moment. But then the other caricature, which unfortunately you can't have, which is at the bottom, which just came out in a paper a couple of days ago, it has a mother holding a child and telling the child, put on your slippers, you're going to step on a constitutional declaration. Basically because we've had what is effectively a diarrhea of constitutional declarations over the last year and a half. So that instead of the constitution being something that is expected to solve the country, or at least help complete the revolution, it's become sort of a banal legal issue to be dismissed in a cartoon like this. To close, at a time of revolution, and Tunisia is another model to look at, and Syria hopefully in the future. There is a saying, as you know, not a saying, but a quote from Shakespeare's play Henry V, where one of the revolutionaries at the height of a revolution basically tells the leader of the revolution that the first thing that we should do is to kill all the lawyers, right? And there are two interpretations for why you should kill all the lawyers at the beginning of revolution. One is that lawyers by nature are conservative, and that they'll do what they've done at 52 to 54, and again what they're doing today. And hence the only solution to ensure justice, or to ensure that the revolution is completed, is to kill all the lawyers. The other interpretation of killing all the lawyers is that lawyers by nature are defenders of minority against oppression of the majority, which is very possible to happen at times of revolution. In that sense, killing them might be a necessary way to allow for a reign of terror that can then lead to another stage. Between the two, there has to be some option. There are far too many lawyers in Egypt to kill them all. But there has to be some way in which an exceptional form of revolutionary justice can be allowed, and the term rule of law can be curtailed from becoming an obstacle to completing the revolution as opposed to an element that aids it. With the lesson of 1952 to 54 in mind, and with the lesson that our jurists today should take from Sanhuri back then. I'm not hoping that any of our great judges who are helping the army today meet Sanhuri's same fate and are beaten up before a court, but that is certainly something that might happen. Thank you.